That was
councillors, please be upstanding. Welcome to extraordinary meeting 4529 of Hunters Hill Council. I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. Reverend Michael Armstrong joins us today and will deliver the prayer.
Let me pray. As we gather in the presence of God, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land upon which we meet, the Wallamata people. In your wisdom and love, Lord, you gave this land to them. As we continue to learn to live together on these ancestral lands, we pray for hearts that may be seeking to be reconciled. We also pray for such reconciliation to be in lands around the world. We especially pray for the people in the Holy Land, people of Ukraine and Russia, people of Myanmar, Afghanistan, Somalia, the Congo, and so many other places where there is war and terror. We pray for members of our community who have fled these places or have links to these places. May they know your peace and live at peace in this land. Pray in this night for those who grieve. We especially hold in our hearts the family of Peter Astridge and Father Kevin and so many more. Pray for our King, Charles, that you might bring him healing and wholeness along with all peoples of every land. Pray for our nation, for Anthony, our Prime Minister, his government, and Kylie, our Federal Representative, for Chris, our Premier, and his government, and Anthony, our State Representative. We pray for our Council, for Zach, our Mayor, for Ross, Julia, Tatiana, Jim, Elizabeth and Richard, our councillors, for Mitchell, our General Manager, and for all the staff and all who volunteer. We pray for your grace, that our councillors may diligently and honourably, free from private interest or prejudice, discharge the duties entrusted to them. We pray upon this meeting, a spirit of wisdom, generosity, and a willingness to work together for the common good of all people. And let me especially mindful for those who are in great need. Give us, Lord, the will to use all at our disposal to meet the needs of all who are in need, and the will to serve others as you served. We pray this through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.
Councillors and members of the gallery, with your indulgence, as Reverend Michael alluded to, sadly, since Christmas, 4 significant members of our community have passed, and they had made enormous contributions to Hunters Hill in their time. Lane Walker AO passed away on the 27th of January. He was a local businessman and philanthropist. Hunters Hill Bush Care volunteer Marina O'Brien passed away on the 27th of January. Father Kevin Bates passed away on the 31st of January, and former councillor Peter Astridge passed away on the 10th of February. And Councillor Quinn has also brought to my attention that Professor Michael O'Rourke has also passed away in the period since we last met. These are obviously a great loss to our community here, and we'll be formally recognising these individuals at the next ordinary meeting of council next Monday, the 26th of February, in mayoral minutes. But before we do proceed with the extraordinary meeting today, I just ask that we all observe a minute's silence. Thank you. Please be seated. Councillors, there are no apologies, and I'll call for declarations of interest. There being none, I will move on to item 1.1, proposed changes to New South Wales housing policy. As you'd all be aware, we haven't had a meeting scheduled until next week. And unfortunately, under the circumstances which we found ourselves, even with a written request to the government to extend the the deadline of the submissions for the housing changes that were proposed by the Minns government, the request was refused for an extension for 1 week. So we have been forced to convene this extraordinary meeting to deal with our submission to this policy. There is a recommendation in the report. Usually I wouldn't, but I will move the recommendation with minor amendment. The recommendation is that 1, Council endorse the attached submission to the New South Wales Department of Planning, Housing and Infrastructure, which raises serious concerns with the proposals outlined within the document titled Explanation of Intended Effect Changes to Create Low and Mid-Rise Housing. Recommendation number 2, that Council continue to work with the North Sydney Region Organisation of Councils, NESROC, to support collective regional action to ensure the reforms achieve desired aims and endorse the key issues expressed from the extraordinary NESROC meeting, which was held on the 15th of February 2024, last Thursday. The lack of clarity regarding the detail of the reforms, the move away from Council's local strategic planning framework and not adopt the one-size-fits-all approach, the expected impact on our residential streets and neighbourhoods, including our heritage and conservation areas. And 3, that the Mayor and General Manager seek an urgent meeting with the Minister for Planning and Public Spaces to highlight these concerns and seek an alternative collaborative approach to housing reforms as outlined within the submission included as attachment 1 to this report. Is there a second to that motion? Seconded, Councillor Bergara. I will briefly speak to that, councillors.
Mr. Mayor, we have speakers tonight.
Oh, we do. Sorry. We have 3 speakers to this report. The first speaker is Mr. Robert Hayes. Thank you, Mr. Hayes. You have 3 minutes.
Thank you. I'm Bob Hayes, a Hunters Hill resident. I don't believe the Department of Planning's proposed policy is right for Sydney, and especially for special places like Hunters Hill. Governments need to address the housing crisis, but cramming more development into already overcrowded city is not the best way forward. I'm also unconvinced that DPE's strategic planning process is optimal in this case. In year 2000, Premier Bob Carr famously said, "Sydney is full." At that time, its population was 3.8 million. Now it's 5.2 million and estimated to be 6.3 by 2033. Sydney is now really full. And DPE's push to increase residential density is just getting started. DPE does lots of strategic planning, but have they started by answering the big questions? Ideally, how big should the Australian population be and where should it be distributed? What is sustainable given the currently available locations? At what stage does surging population growth choke a city to the point where quality of life plummets? What does a choked city look like? We already see major signs of it in Sydney: overcrowding, traffic congestion, frustration, declining quality of life, pollution and pressure on critical services, infrastructure, natural environment, wildlife and heritage, built heritage. Is there a point where treasured values and principles must be dispensed with or watered down? For example, the local environmental plan primary aim to protect the character, integrity and amenity of existing neighbourhoods. Why does the population need to grow so fast? Have governments definitely decided that big Australia is desirable or necessary? I don't believe that momentous decision has been properly made and formally announced. It must not be assumed in policy making. This decision should only be made after extensive public debate and consultation, then widely publicised. Is there a paradigm underpinning much of the government planning that we should rush towards a big Australia, including this housing policy? To me, it appears so. Are councils, regulations, red tape, and indeed the public who might object expected to get out of the way of development? It also appears so. For example, the DPE's proposed non-refusal standards. Is a blanket increase in urban density inevitable? Probably, but it doesn't have to be. What needs to change? The government strategic analysis should be more holistic. That is, federal, state and local government should jointly cooperate to strategically analyse all the critical things that need to be simultaneously balanced, starting with the following questions.
Extension of time, Councillor Williams, seconded Councillor Crassoy, put that, all those in favour, against, carried.
Thank you. What sort of Australia do we want? For example, do we want to maximise corporate profits or maximise the well-being and happiness of the population? How big a population should we aim for? Where and why? What's the maximum population size our existing cities can absorb? Should people mostly live in one large coastal city in each state and territory, no matter how big these places become? What are the pros and cons? What are the alternatives to blanket increases in urban density? Why can't the population be distributed more evenly across the country? For example, why can't large towns become small to medium-sized cities like overseas? How can the government encourage people to populate such places? What does it take for governments to identify long-term goals and actively pursue sustainable options? In the meantime, we are faced with the government's default option of imposing unacceptably high density across existing city suburbs. What's the bottom line? The government must not ruin Sydney's existing suburbs and must retain residents' democratic right to object. Secondly, the government should perform more holistic strategic analysis, starting by debating, consulting and answering the obvious big questions and develop sustainable housing policies on that foundation. Third, the policy process should be fair, reasonable, logical and based on respect for existing residents, environments and quality of life. Fourth, imposing draconian policies on an existing population is unacceptable and won't work.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes. Councillors, any questions? Not. Thank you.
Sorry,
Councillor Quinn.
So, thanks for those words, Bob. So you'd be aware of the letter that has been drafted for council to send off to the minister in response to this, the recommendations that are on page 3 of that submission. Do you concur with the recommendations that are in that correspondence that's been drafted, which is basically saying abandon the reforms, go back to the drawing board, talk to communities?
I concur with that.
Councillors, any more questions? If not, thank you, Mr. Hayes. I'll call our second speaker, Karen Raisin. Thank you, Karen. You have 3 minutes.
A long 3 minutes. Thank you. My name is Karen Raisin and I speak tonight as President of Hunters Hill Trust. Former Treasury Secretary Ken Henry got it right when he said policymakers have allowed intergenerational unfairness to become embedded in our systems, with housing one of the big 3 policy failures of our time. The state government's proposed one-size-fits-all changes to housing density bring other words to mind: undemocratic, unacceptable and unprecedented. And yes, unfair to the many homeowners, residents, local communities and representatives of local government of regional cities across the state. We were pleased to read Hunters Hill Council's report by Mr. Metcalfe and proposed submission by General Manager Mitchell Murphy to the Department of Planning, which is reflective of community sentiment and representative of our concerns regarding the impacts. Much of our LGA is a conservation area, as the maps will attest. Increased density via significant changes to our planning standards will increase heights, result in loss of trees and tree canopy, increase traffic congestion and parking, and decrease landscaping requirements, and will most definitely alter the look, character, livability, environment, and amenity of our municipality. We encourage our members and council to go hard and oppose the application of one-size-fits-all and seek recognition and reasonableness as to the individual uniqueness of our heritage conservation areas and special environmental factors. The Trust supports the idea of infill housing to increase housing density. Terraces, semi-detached homes, dual occupancy, and where applicable, even adaptive reuse. However, to initiate a blanket approach of planning rules, which allow lot sizes as small as 450 square metres for dual occupancy, and which strip away protections with non-refusal standards that override our LEP, is not the answer, nor suitable for small communities like ours. Rather, it's authoritarian. Why should developers get to bypass LEP rules that protect our character, streetscape, our built heritage, our natural environment, and reflect community vision and values for the future? Where's the evidence increased development will make housing more affordable? Where can we find traffic and parking studies? The National Trust suggests planning changes should not apply to heritage conservation areas, nor to adjoining heritage items, and the Trust would agree with that. The National Trust also acknowledged that some areas have inherently resistant price points, meaning expensive areas will simply remain expensive.
Move extension of time. Councillor Preston, seconded. Councillor Quinn. All those in favour? Against? Carried.
Thank you. We don't want to risk losing our history and irreplaceable heritage for no collective gain to the community. Even if we accept that some will welcome these across the board, one-size-fits-all actions, we believe it's a misconception that such changes in planning rules will make housing more affordable for the benefit of younger generations. There's no evidence that areas with higher densities are affordable. Where is it? February 14, the Sydney Morning Herald headline, lending to property investors reached a 6-year high as a share of total home lending. Over 36% of all housing finance in December went to investors. February 12, Sydney Morning Herald reported consultants Urbis on behalf of Airbnb concede there is a positive correlation between 60,000 short-term Airbnbs and poor housing affordability in New South Wales. Well-known finance expert Alan Kohler calls Australia's housing mess the Great Divide in his recent quarterly essay, which I've got here. The place we call home and raised families in has turned into speculative investment assets due to years of policy failure and greed. Further, he reports, after 9.5 years of production time, developers still hold 76.2% of their land vacant. It's called land banking, and it's on page 81 of the report, 81. And then there's factors like negative gearing, immigration, foreign investors. The reasons why we got to where we are right now are complex, and it's simplistic to think that blanket planning controls will undo years of policy neglect and incentives that entrench housing as an investment class and have led to unaffordable house prices and inequality. Shelter, putting a roof over your head, is a basic human right. We'll agree on this. However, the people of Hunters Hill also have rights. Our homes, our neighbourhoods, our sense of place and community, and our precious natural environment are now under threat. Let's work together collaboratively to find a better solution. No one here tonight wants to feel powerless to unreasonable plans for overdevelopment on a neighbouring property that will negatively impact their lives and the value of their home. Council staff has spent an enormous amount of time and energy and community consultation reviewing and strengthening our protections through the LEP. Is this work now to be totally ignored? We trust Council's efforts on behalf of residents will take a more realistic approach to such vexing issues and strongly advocate to protect overdevelopment of our unique natural environment with harbour and river foreshore topography, natural bushland settings, peninsulas that provide only single road access. Almost there.
Move to extension time. Councillor Williams, seconded. Councillor Sanderson. All those in favour? Against? Carried.
I'll start that again. Peninsulas that provide only single road access to Hunters Hill Hub, a central crossroad location for both city-bound and northbound peak hour traffic. But more importantly, advocacy. That's what's vital to preserve and protect historical and environmental values for future generations. We do support Council's draft submission to the Department of Planning, Housing and Infrastructure. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Raisen. Councillors, any questions? Councillor Craswell.
Just to say thank you. It was beautifully written and thorough, and I'm hoping that you're planning to submit that to the planning.
And more, and more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's really important that everyone who has something to say does it through that panel.
Absolutely, absolutely. Okay, thank you.
Councillors, any more questions? No? Thank you, Ms. Rosen. We now have our last speaker, Reverend Michael Armstrong. Reverend, I'd say you have 3 minutes, but it seems like you have as long as you like.
I'll take 3. I want to thank the council staff for their work on seeking to provide submission to the New South Wales Government in regards to the proposed changes, and recognise the time constraints placed on everyone to try and make representations. I share your disappointment that further time for community consultation has not been afforded, and so we'll certainly be praying for further conversations which you hope to have with the state government. I am most conscious that more and more the community standards and strategic outcomes that council have developed are being pushed aside by developers who skip the process and go to Land Environment Court before they come here. And I'm fearful the removal of further checks and balances means that community standards will no longer be an outcome that they even need to consider. I do believe, however, that in any proposed change comes an opportunity for conversations that need to be had about the ongoing needs of our community and the importance of planning for the future, and not just for some, but for all. 12.3% of households in Hunters Hill, according to the last census, are living below the poverty line of $650 a week. That's 1 in 10 people in our community. Average rents last census were $540 a week. Try and find one now for $540 a week in Hunters Hill. We have huge issues around loneliness, depression, anxiety, and abuse, often as a result of disconnect, reflected perhaps that 24% of people in Hunters Hill live alone, but often in larger homes. These are considerable issues and are a part of what is driving an agenda for new options to be considered. And while I do not wish for a free-for-all in any way, I do wish for us to have some real conversations about how we might have shared housing, affordable housing, options to downsize, options for those who want to meet their diverse needs, particularly housing for those with disability or needs of increased levels of care, which is not found in aged care. So I want you to most certainly represent our concerns about what is proposed and to push back hard. But I also want council to be going with an open mind, open to seeing real possibilities that will make a difference to those who are in real need in our community. Again, thank you for your work and pray that the representations may be well heard, which I'll add mine, and that from them, we might have some real opportunities to have some great conversations about the needs of our community and the opportunities that exist and those that are truly needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Reverend Armstrong. Councillors, any questions? Councillor Quinn.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, if I may, the same question I asked Bob, and I didn't ask Karen because she said it in her final sentence, but do you support the submission the council has drafted, particularly the last 2 recommendations?
Yes, absolutely. Particularly the last recommendation of ongoing conversation, I think is quite vital. We need to keep talking and they should be playing ball with us, not pushing one direction.
Thank you.
Councillors, any further questions? If not, thank you, Reverend.
Thank you.
And my apologies for jumping the gun earlier to those speakers. Obviously a bit overzealous there. Councillors, I have moved the motion in the paper with some minor amendments to point 2.
Could you please put the amendments up?
Yes, I can. And acknowledging that there has been some recommendations, amendments sent through today, Councillor Crassoy and Councillor Sanderson. We will get to those in a moment. I thought that it would be helpful for those in the gallery and for the councillors who have just only received the draft NESROC papers and their proposed draft submission. We at NESROC, Councillor Crassoy and I, as your representatives from council, met last Thursday to discuss the regional effort to go into feedback to the government on these planning reforms. Obviously, there are some deeply shared concerns amongst the NESROC councils. Some are unique concerns to different councils that have different planning desires and LSPSs and strategic plans, but there was a consensus there that all of the NESROC councils did not support the one-size-fits-all approach and did not want to abandon place-based planning. At that meeting, we have drafted an assurance that we are calling for from the New South Wales government to work with councils and communities to provide place-based planning and not adopt a one-size-fits-all approach. The state government's proposed approach will result in development without appropriate planning, the impacts of which will only be understood when it's too late to mitigate them. We're calling on the government to defer implementation of the low and mid-rise housing SEP altogether, giving councils their housing targets and the timeframe to demonstrate how they will be achieved. This will allow councils and their communities to undertake their strategic planning upzone areas themselves and ensure that the greater density is delivered where there is capacity and amenity. The proposed SEP should be implemented only in cases where there are failures in council's ability to demonstrate how they intend to achieve their targets. We're calling for clarity on the definition of the town centre precincts and measurement of the target walking catchments, for deferral of the implementation of the transport-oriented development SEP, so that councils can undertake the strategic planning upzone areas themselves and demonstrate how they will meet housing targets with agreed timeframes, to demonstrate how we will ensure that additional housing is delivered alongside critical infrastructure, including waste services, hospitals, schools and open space. The reforms override long-term strategic planning processes that ensure the delivery of dwellings alongside supporting infrastructure and services. Sydney Water has already acknowledged, for example, that water and sewage system does not have the necessary capacity for the current operations, let alone proposed increases to housing density. The state government's proposal will also exacerbate the gap in supply of sports facilities identified in the recently released NESROC sporting strategy. To recognise the factors other than capacity and zoning affect housing supply. Market factors such as land banking and construction costs can be a significant barrier to increasing housing supply. Construction has yet to commence on a large number of housing approvals already in them. Further clarification is required on how the proposed reform will address existing and future barriers to the construction of dwellings. We're calling on the government to prevent the erosion of employment lands, particularly in North Sydney Council and Ryde, to exclude the exclusion of bushfire and flood-prone land where lands are mapped as having high biodiversity value and heritage conservation areas from the reform. These areas require careful planning and evaluation of environmental impacts and capacity constraints. And the requirement of developers to in receiving the affordable housing height bonus to dedicate affordable housing in perpetuity. As our population increases, there will also be need for increased affordable housing. It's critical that affordable housing does not revert to market rates after just 15 years of the stock going to market. So those are some of the issues that we deliberated on and agreed on in NESROC's draft strategy that will also be being submitted to the state government. I think Reverend Armstrong's point about checks and balances is the most important one when it comes to place-based planning. There's a lot of silence in the draft SEP about things that are very important to us here in Hunters Hill. For example, we don't know about what the treatment of heritage conservation areas is going to be, whether that is going to be overridden by the Code SEP or whether or not heritage conservation areas that have been established and long established within our LEP and DCP frameworks will be maintained. It's completely silent on those issues. So as we get into debate, as I said, there have been some amendments that have been sent through that I'm sure that we'll get some councillors to talk to in a moment. But council is taking these concerns very seriously. Obviously, our submission is step one in what will be a long process of engagement with the state government, and hopefully they do come to the table. I also would like to reiterate that it would be very helpful for us as a council to have representatives come to present to a public meeting from the state department, so that the departmental officials and the people that are running this reform process can hear directly from our community. So we'll be calling for that to be something that the department does in conjunction with our council in the coming weeks. Councillors, I'll put this to the floor. I know that there are some amendments. Councillor Crassoy.
Thank you for moving the recommendation, Mr. Mayor. Further to the last point that you made and our discussion today in the emails that I've sent fellow councillors today, I wonder, Mr. Mayor, whether you would consider adding a fourth point that you as the Mayor would facilitate and chair a public meeting inviting the department to attend, to assist our community in understanding the implications of this and to hear our community's views.
Very comfortable. Seconder, comfortable. Could we just word that up if that is okay? Point 4. No, it doesn't.
That that the Mayor convene an urgent, structured community meeting and forum to consider the advice of our residents and to collate the concerns and opportunities that our own communities see with the EIE as currently proposed by the department. Yep. They have it.
Sorry?
They have it.
Okay.
So, you want me to keep going? That the Mayor convene an urgent structured community meeting and forum to consider the advice of our residents and to collate the concerns and opportunities that our own communities see with the EIE. As currently proposed by the department. Oh. In
And that we invite.
yeah, so I don't know if it needs to be a fifth point in including an invitation to appropriate departmental representatives. Minister for Planning.
I think that might be a stretch, but we can invite him. Yep.
And our state member. that okay?
Appropriate departmental representatives, the Minister for Planning. Our state member. Thank you, Councillor.
Can I talk to that
seconded, Councillor. That you're comfortable with that?
What about, I think you should add our federal member, because as Bob said, the demand side is just as relevant.
Well, it did begin with a federal.
Happy to. Yeah.
Our state, federal and state member. Federal and state members.
You should also write out the name of the document because we haven't defined it as AIA.
So the expression of intended effect. Explanation of intended effect. Is that right?
Okay.
This replacing councillor presidents. Thank you, Councillor Crassoy. Are you comfortable with that?
Are you happy for me to talk to that?
I'm happy for you to talk to that, yes.
Thank you. There's actually so much that I want to say about what the state are attempting to do here that I'm actually speechless. And I'm incredibly grateful that we have strong and intelligent and articulate voices in our own community to assist us. I know that sometimes the way we go about things isn't around the table, we don't always agree, and in amongst our own community, we don't always agree. But I think it's critical at this very early stage, and it still is very early, remembering this was dumped on us just before Christmas. And I think it's critical that we all have a voice in a room together I hope that when the mayor convenes the meeting, that we may be able to induce the general manager to also have some planning support in the room for us to seek their professional opinion and advice on how we go about sending this strong message to the state. I agree with Reverend Armstrong. I think that we must look at more affordable housing in our area. We need to look at downsizing opportunities. We must have a tiny bit more low to medium density across our whole suburb, but we need to be in control of that because we live here and we breathe here and we know here. The state haven't told us how they plan to go about this, and you all know it, so I'm not going to ramble on, but it was a point made at Nesrock by Ryde Council that they already have 23,000 dwellings in the planning portal that the state can't approve because Sydney Water have said they can't supply the water to that many dwellings. So why would you steamroll this through and allow developers to potentially snap up a handful of heritage houses? In fact, the 4 heritage terraces, one of which I just moved into, could currently, with the lack of insight we currently have, potentially be snapped up by a developer before this is rolled back. And it would make a very nice spot with harbour views for a 6-storey development. So we don't know because we don't know. So we need the state here. And we need our whole community in a positive and proactive way to be at the table, recognising what we need with our current population. We need our grandchildren and our children to stay closer to Sydney, but there's no point providing more housing for our children to raise our grandchildren if they can't send them to school here as well. So we've got to work together, and hence the public meeting early. Even though we really have not enough information, we need to work together as a community. So thank you, Mr. Mayor, for adding that amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Cresswell. Anyone speaking against the motion? For the motion? Councillor Quinn. Councillor Quinn's got the call.
The amendment.
Amendment's been accepted into the motion. It is already the motion.
Well, I'd like to put further amendment if I may.
Councillor Quinn's got the call.
Okay, Mr. Mayor, I've just got it's more a question. So in our draft submission, it nowhere does it explicitly say, and I guess the reason I can't say that is because we haven't actually resolved this yet. But I'm wondering, getting a sense of the room here, if our submission also needs to be explicit that council does not support the reforms in their current form. Now, throughout the document, it says council has grave concerns, and so on. It uses those words. But nowhere does it say that council does not support the reforms, the EIE reforms in their current form. And therefore, I wonder, in the 2 recommendations at the end of the report, should we include those words, council does not support the EIE reforms in its current form, and blah, 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 blah. I'll just throw that out there.
Councillor Williams.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to move some amendments if I could. I'm comfortable with everything that's there. But I'd also like, and I've sent that through to the General Manager, to take up that point that Councillor Quinn has just said. I'd like to include, well, we'll just add these on if that's acceptable. That'll become number 5. Express deep concern about the state government's irresponsible approach to planning for the future of the built and natural environment of New South Wales.
That would be a point 5.
Yep.
Which is point 4 from the form that you sent through prior.
Oh, okay. I thought I'd sent it through. You can't just cut notes.
Sorry, councillor. No.
Yep. Express deep concern about the state government's irresponsible approach to planning for the future of the built and natural environment of New South Wales.
And then on for the other 8 points.
Yeah, and then the next one, which whatever the number would be, is rejects the proposed changes to the planning controls and demands that they be withdrawn
Sorry, councillor, I just want to throw to the general manager for one moment. Just would like to raise a point.
Councillor Williams, just can I just ask, is this essentially what I received from Councillor Sanderson?
Exactly.
Okay, so do you mind if we call that up?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I
was at a
got it
meeting-
from Councillor Sanderson, that's why I was a bit confused.
Yeah, no, I was at a meeting in the city today.
It's okay.
Councillor Sanderson.
So this is what we're referring to?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, cool. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Williams, please continue.
Okay, as I said, up there would be 6, which rejects the proposed changes to the planning controls and demands that they be withdrawn with genuine consultation to be undertaken with councils of communities as intended under the housing strategy, the Housing Accord 2022. The next point explores all options to oppose the changes and stop them from being implemented. The next point rejects the proposed changes because they will have a profound and detrimental effect on the heritage, conservation areas, sustainability, and the need to meet targets set under Greening Sydney strategy. As proposed, reforms will leave inadequate space for trees and gardens, values held deeply by the Hunters Hill community. The next point, continue to actively inform the community and request NESROC and the local government New South Wales lobby against the proposed changes to planning controls. Next point, arrange for banners in key locations to alert residents to the proposed changes with expenditure to come from the unrestricted funds. And the final point, that's in addition to what's already there, is continue to actively campaign against the proposed changes, collaborating with the community, councils and other stakeholders.
Thank you, councillor. A lot of that's duplicated within the report itself and within the submission. Do you intend to move that still?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, because I think it needs to be explicit in council's resolution, its concerns. It's evident in what NESROC's doing, it's evident in what local government New South Wales is doing. It's also evident in the reporting that we've got here today, but it's not explicitly put council's position, and we are an independent council, and I think we should look after our community in a very upfront way.
Thank you, councillor. Is there a second to those amendments? Councillor Sanderson. Councillor Williams, would you like to speak to the amendments?
Yes, we've heard a lot today, and I concur with all, both community and what's been said by yourself and the Deputy Mayor so far. This whole process has been driven by haste. It's all about undercover sort of activity during Christmas and not giving anybody any time to respond. And the intent of this going live is the 1st of July this year. There is not a great deal of time to influence or change. We have a proud history in Hunters Hill of being very proactive and active against things that do undermine our values and our lifestyle in this municipality. We fought the merger processes in 2003 and 2017. We fought a very similar process to this in 2005 for 5 years, the Hazard planning changes. And what Hazard, who was the Liberal government planning minister, wanted to do was to take away zonings. And that was fought very hard by the community, by the Better Planning Network, and by ourselves here in Hunters Hill. And we succeeded. It was a double-edged sword because once succeeding, the government then turned to mergers because it couldn't get its planning changes through, went to the merger process, Fit for Future, and all the sort of nonsense that went through that process. The only way those big issues, and many more over the years, have been turned around is by very clear, articulated concerns and, where necessary, opposition. I do agree that we need to do more in the future to meet housing demands and needs, but it shouldn't be at the expense of everything we hold as value in Hunters Hill. So I think it's important to be very clear about the intent to enable the community to rally behind where council thinks we need to go, and to continue the consultation process, both with the community. And I don't think we have much time to negotiate with government. There isn't a will or intent of government to engage with us. Just aside, and going on further from, I think it was Mrs. Tate, at the local government conference recently, a professor got up and spoke, and at the moment he was saying there was 180,000, I think it was, unfulfilled DAs that are approved. The building industry is not taking those up, not because council's dilly-dallying or refusing, as you would find in the press, but more importantly, because developers don't have the profit in it anymore. They don't have the resources, the materials, or the tradespeople to build these things. So to go headlong into this process at the moment, to just cut through everything, turn everything into one size fits all, is ridiculous, because there's no capacity in the industry to deliver on this in the time frame that they're looking at. There is plenty of time for us to work through the process, come up with a solution that will help us grow in those areas that Reverend Armstrong mentioned, at the same time as preserving what we hold value in the area. There is no ability or no need to rush into this by the government. The government is playing bully boy tactics, and I think we need to very clearly express our concerns about that approach.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Is there anyone speaking against the amendment? For the amendment? Councillor Sanderson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Councillor Williams has already alluded to some of the earlier battles when I wasn't quite as involved with council as now. And they continued. We had the amalgamation issue. Immediately after the 2017 election, we had powers removed from councillors to make planning decisions. We've had our LEPs weakened by having rotation of members. The number one law in planning, if Mr. Caribus would agree with me, that consistency is a key thing. Those measures have brought in consistency in planning. Our planning and the way it's developed in Huddersfield must be valued. And unfortunately, this process shows absolutely no respect for the time that this council and this community have worked on our strategic documents. I don't believe the proposal is any way salvageable. I think we need to send a very strong message. An earlier draft that went around earlier this morning was drew on a motion that was passed or was resolved in the affirmative and unanimously at Ku-ring-gai Council on the 5th of February. It actually began with the words, if I can find it, of saying that Ku-ring-gai Council condemns the state government for its irresponsible approach to planning for the future of the built natural environment in New South Wales. Now, I know Councillor Crassley had some concerns about that wording, and we have brought that back to talk about deep concern. But we need to express this deep concern because the approach of the state government is totally irresponsible. When you have a look at what they're proposing, we're talking about, well, first of all, just launching this something of this magnitude immediately prior to Christmas is more than irresponsible. Drawing arbitrary circles around local centres without understanding what's in the local centre, and worse still, not understanding what that circle contains, is totally arbitrary and highly irresponsible. We have other problems with this. Some of the medium scale or the impact that it would have, and again, I go back to the point that it doesn't. It's been made earlier, and I must say I agree with just about everything that's been said tonight. And one of the problems we have is defining these zones that come around town centres. Now, it'd be a tragedy if Woolwich or Garibaldi is defined as a town centre, as Councillor Prassel has already alluded to. I don't know that they get 6-storey where you are, but there is a huge amount of 6-storey potential if these reforms get through and Woolwich Village happens to be regarded as a town centre. I can't see sense, you'd hope there'd be a shred of common sense and that sort of thing wouldn't happen. That sort of thing wouldn't happen. But even around Gladesville, if you draw the 400-metre circle around the development there's a huge amount of relatively low scale development that would come into being classified as R3 medium density, where you would get 6-storey. Totally inappropriate. We don't have the resources to manage it. I really don't believe that this what the state government is proposing is salvageable, and I think we've got to be fairly strong in saying it at the outset. I think this will probably turn out being one of these battles like council amalgamation and some of the others, where we have showed up at the tree of knowledge and made submissions to those in the parliament to change their position. One of the other things that scares me too about the potential of the 6-storey development is that back in 2015, I was a relatively unknown independent candidate in the seat of Lane Cove. And one of the points that I had very strong disagreement with the major party candidate over was the proposed changes to strata law. And the big thing I really objected to there was that what they were proposing and what now exists mean that a developer only needs to convince 75% of the entitlements in that unit to sell out. I don't know what the other 25% do if they don't have any other option. So don't think that it won't be easy for the developers to snap up these areas that do have the potential for 6-storey development if it goes that way. So that is another consideration that really bothers me about this whole plan. I could go on further, but I think it's fair enough to call it the proposal irresponsible. And I think all the other measures that are proposed in the amendment are perfectly reasonable. If you have a look at the National Housing Accord, not a long document, but it is inclusive of local government and communities. And I mean, the level of inclusion of communities, given that they weren't given no opportunity on parts of the group proposals that are before or being considered by state government at the present time, I would hardly regard it as being inclusive of communities. I think we said we reject the proposals. This is consistent with the submission that has been prepared, because the submission goes as far as saying the proposal should be withdrawn. So I think it's entirely consistent in our motion to be saying the things that Councillor Williams has proposed in this amendment. And I believe as I said before, this will be a thing as we rallied to save the municipality back in the time leading up to 2017, when they eventually withdrew the proposal. In fact, the court ruled in our favour more to the point. So that the critical thing was the fact that the council stuck to its guns and appealed to the court. I'm getting a bit off track, but I'm just saying that this is going to be a big issue. Can't see it's going to be resolved quietly or as much as I believe we should be talking to people. But I just see there's no future for the proposal as it stands.
Thank you, Councillor Sanderson. Any speakers against the amendment? For the amendment, right of reply, Councillor Williams.
No, thank you.
No, I'll put the amendment. All those in favour? Against? That is lost. The motion on the floor. Are there any speakers for the motion? Councillor Quinn.
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Look, I think we need to be very brief but concise in what we resolve to do. And I think the motion now, as it has been amended, is very clear. I think is important that when you send a message that it's not a message like this, but it's very sharp, pointed, brief, but to the point. And that's why I'm a great believer in having a resolution that is going to point out the high level points and make it very clear what the position of this council is.
Thank you, Councillor Quinn. Any speakers against the motion? For the motion in question?
Sorry, question, Mr Mayor, through you, Councillor Quinn. Further to your earlier point about rejecting the proposal, were you planning to put that?
Well, look, I'm conscious I'd be contradicting my own words. I think the council officers, you know, I'm happy to add that we just include in that first of the last two recommendations that council does not support the EIE reforms in their current form and urges .
I'm very comfortable to put that in my cover letter to the minister as well. No, Councillor Craswell.
Just another question to
Yes.
Councillor Quinn. So point 1 of the recommendation says that council endorse the attached submission, blah, blah, blah. So you wouldn't consider saying that council does not support the EIE in its current form and that we endorse this attached submission, blah, blah, blah.
Well, by us putting it in the submission, we're endorsing those words in the actual document we're sending to the government.
Yes.
It's there.
Councillors, any other speakers for the motion? Councillor Priest.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I won't spend long, as I would just be echoing the sentiment around the table tonight. I think that it's an appalling and bizarre play by the state Labor government, and to be so unjust as to not allow us additional time and to force an extraordinary meeting upon us tonight is also abhorrent from the department. I think that the resolution of the motion on the table is in good form. I think it's succinct, as Councillor Quinn mentioned. And I think that it actually, the next step will allow us to actually come up with some potentially creative policy ideas in order to meet the needs, as Reverend Armstrong suggested, of our broader community. I note that in the report provided by the council staff tonight, it mentions our initiatives to deliver diverse and well-located housing through our existing strategic planning framework, for example, the Gladesville Town Centre, the former Gladesville Hospital, Hunters Hill Village and Baronia Park. So I look forward to delving into those ideas a bit further, and I agree with the rest of my fellow councillors that this is not the way and we should be rejecting the proposal brought forward by the state government.
Thank you, Councillor. Any speakers against the motion? For the motion? Councillor Craswell.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I do actually also want to thank and acknowledge that we are part of a bigger community who all have concerns around this, that the Northern Sydney Region of Councils, NESROC, have gathered and put together some really succinct and valid points around our concerns about not just providing affordable housing for 15 years, but actually in perpetuity. And also that Local Government New South Wales are representing us. And also to thank the General Manager and his incredibly talented team who, having had this dropped on them just before Christmas, have worked very hard to provide, really, this is a beautiful piece of work. It's concise and it does represent all our views, which is why Councillor Sanderson and Williams, as I mentioned in my email earlier today, I'm too am concerned about that part of the document being too wordy, even though we all know by now I'm a wordy person. I have looked at the proposal that council's sending, the submission that council's sending, and everything that you've said in your amendments is scooped up in that, and we are endorsing that. So we are saying everything that you've said within that document. So thank you to everyone who's been involved today. I think it's important and I think it's really positive, and we're going to do good things with it. And hopefully when the state do come back to the table, they'll do good things with us, because we need planning reform, but we need to be in charge of our own destiny.
Thank you, Councillor. Any speakers against the motion? For the motion, Councillor Preston, question.
Could I ask a question?
Yes.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the director. So could you maybe just outline the next steps after we put in our draft submission? The department?
It's not a draft. It's
sorry, we decided it's a submission. Yeah.
Through you, Mayor. I'm assuming the department will consider all the submissions through that process. I don't know, they haven't provided us with a timetable and they haven't provided us with that detail. I've asked for that detail. Having said that, it's normal practice that a state plan document, legal document, will come out in fruition following the submissions, and they listen to the submissions, and we have an opportunity to make comments. I don't know if they're going to do that. They might just bring out a set. The state government can override us in that. So I can't answer that. I don't know. All I know that submissions go in, they'll consider them, and then we can probably get some recall back. We'll ask for a meeting, we'll ask for discussions, but once I hear of a program, I'll definitely advise council.
Thank you. Councillors,
Just to add to that,
General
Mr.
Manager.
Mayor. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the speakers this evening. In local government, we do love a good acronym, so just bear with me for a minute. In addition to NESROC, we have a general managers, which we call GMAC. And the general managers cohort from all the councils in the NESROC cohort met with department planners last week, and we asked a series of questions, and my questions in particular around dual occupancy and protection of conservation zones. And we asked the very question, what was the next steps in terms of time frame? The only thing I can say tonight, with all the questions pertaining to that, the answers were vague at best.
thank you, General Manager. Councillors, any other speakers for the motion, against the motion?
Oh, no, I have a question at this stage.
Yes, Councillor Sanderson.
That relates to some material that Councillor Crassoy sent around today, and the possibility of amending the submission or adding to the submission after you've had the community consultation process. That hasn't been reflected in the motions as I believe they would be. Is that opportunity still open?
As I read the motion, Councillor Sanderson, this would be our submission. I would hope that if we did hold a public meeting and invited the department, even if they didn't front, that at least we would be able to compile and send a strong message from this community to the department. I would hope that in good faith they would engage with us, but I don't have information at hand that they would or wouldn't accept a late submission. I do know that we did request an extension to the submission deadline, and they refused our request for extension.
Can I just get a further clarification on that? Councillor Crassoy's message today referred to, from recollection, I think it's page 12 of the paper, and there was an indication from the department that we could submit a draft ahead of time, and then they would accept the final submission later. If this is the final submission, can we do a supplementary submission based on that email?
I'll ask the development control manager.
Through you, Mayor, that was the whole intent of us asking for an extension, because we didn't have the meet with the council meeting timeline. And the question and the response was, and it's in writing here, no, we won't get an extension, and the draft, it won't be considered. So we had, that's why, hence we're here tonight. So time is of an essence, and that's our concern. Different what's written in the document, we've asked that in writing, and the response was no.
Which I find pretty disgraceful on the part of the department, that they wouldn't grant us a 1 week extension.
So just a clarification on that, because I didn't end up putting that in my amendment, but actually the letter from the department, so unless there's another letter that we didn't receive, because the letter that the department sent us says, if council cannot practically provide an endorsed submission by the due date, we kindly request that a draft submission is provided. This will enable us to start the initial screening of the submissions to avoid delay. Of course, we will receive the final form submission when it is provided, and we have systems in place to make sure that we will consider all issues raised in council's final submission. Now, I didn't put that as an amendment, as part of my amendment, even though I had earlier today, Councillor Sanderson, you're right. even though I had earlier today said that that is what I wanted. And the reason I didn't, on reflection, was that I think our submission needs to be strong. And, I talked with the Mayor and Councillor Quinn and emailed back and forth with everyone. And so just to clarify, my understanding of the letter is that we could submit a draft. But I think the report by the council is excellent. And if we submit it as it is, we could submit addendums after we've had our community meeting. So the process, I just wanted it to.
Thank you, Councillor Crassoy. Councillor Quinn.
And Mr Mayor, I would point out that there is no name on that email. It is not signed off by a person, a responsible person. So, I don't want to take that risk, to be frank.
Thank you.
That was exactly the General Manager's my concern. If you look at page 12, the response from the Office of the Department of Planning on the 1st of February clearly says they've got to meet their commitments and we won't give you an extension.
Councillors, is there any other speakers for the motion? Councillor Sanderson.
Yes, thank you, Mr Mayor. I read the submission in detail, and I'm strongly in agreement with all the points that are made in it. But I think we probably do need to do things outside that submission as well. Other things that I'm a bit disappointed, but I can understand why we don't go into detail. And I did look around at other councils and see what they've done. I've noticed Mossman has taken a very similar approach to ours, and although more or not quite as long, they have raised a couple of other points, but I understand strategically why we would leave those out at this point. That is, they're talking about their specific E1 zones. Yes, look, it is an absolutely essential submission. Again, it does make at a high level, as Councillor Quinn refers to, issues about tree canopy and so on. They're issues that deeply concern me, because when you look at the recommendations, the tree coverage that they're proposing in the tables at the end of their document are rather thin compared to Huntersville standards. And this is why what Councillor Williams and I were proposing referred to a document that was actually came from the City of Sydney Council, which has great resources for doing this sort of work, and that's the Greening Sydney strategy, and that sets targets. Now, Ku-ring-gai clearly had the foresight to look at that, but look, overall, I think it's a great submission. I'm surprised actually that Mossman's was briefer, and a lot of other councils at this point don't have a submission. Lane Cove is going through a very rushed process at the end of this week. So yes, I think we have done quite well, but it's one of those things that we're going to have to continue to watch very carefully, and at the same time listen to the community and the processes that are now in place. So yes, I'm supportive. I think we might be a little bit stronger in making our points.
Thank you, Councillor Sanderson. Any other speakers? Any speakers against the motion? For the motion? If not, I will briefly give a right of reply. Again, councillors, it's good that we can have a robust public meeting, which I look forward to convening sometime in the future, well, soon. The obscure nature of these reforms and the tactics that have been employed by the government to release such an important piece of planning work just prior to Christmas, and to give council such a short period of time to respond to them is concerning. We saw that concern reflected amongst all of the northern regional councils. Again, they have various councils have different concerns around these planned reforms, but we were unanimous in our opposition to move away from place-based planning and to a blanket planning system. It hasn't worked in the past. It wouldn't work here, particularly in Huntersville. the silence around some of the most core components of our LEP-DCP, particularly the silence around heritage conservation areas, the fact that they can't produce a timeline to the professional staff gives me pause. And when reforms are ill thought out at their conception, they can spiral out of control. And we've seen that before in the recent past. I'd like to thank the General Manager and the professional staff for putting this submission together, which is a fantastic submission in such a short period of time. Hopefully it is step one in an engagement process with the state government. With that being said, I will put the motion. All those in favour? Against? That is carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. I will, as that is the only item of business, we have a briefing after this, but for all of those in the gallery, thank you for coming out on a Monday night, and I will declare the meeting closed at 7:11.